You know what my doctor said to me last spring? He looked at my chart, then he looked at me, then he looked back at the chart again, and he said, I remember the exact words. He said, Harold, I don't know what you've been doing differently, but whatever it is, don't stop. And I almost laughed, because what I'd been doing differently was the simplest thing in the world. I've been putting half a teaspoon of something into my morning coffee. That's it. Something you can buy at any grocery store for about $4. Something that's been sitting on the spice shelf next to the cinnamon for as long as I can remember, and I never once gave it a second thought. I'm 72 years old. I've had high blood pressure since my late 50s. My liver numbers had been creeping in the wrong direction for a few years. Nothing dramatic, but enough that my doctor was starting to talk about next steps. And my hair had been thinning at the crown for over a decade. My wife used to say she could see more of my scalp every Christmas. Not in a mean way, just honest. I'm not a doctor. I want to be clear about that right from the start. I'm a retired civil engineer from Ohio. I fix things, and when something in my own body wasn't working the way it should, I did what I've always done. I started reading. I found the research, and I found something that nobody in any of my doctor's offices had ever mentioned to me. The spice is called cardamom. Now, before you close this out thinking I'm about to sell you something, I'm not. There's nothing to buy. There's no link at the bottom. Cardamom is a spice. You probably already have it in your kitchen and just never thought to use it this way. And if you don't have it, you can pick it up tomorrow for a few dollars. That's the whole story right there. But let me tell you why it matters. Because it took me a while to understand it myself. And I think if you're dealing with any of what I was dealing with, this is worth a few minutes of your time. Let me start with the blood pressure, because that's what surprised me most. I had been on a low dose of medication for years, not happy about it, but managing. Then about a year and a half ago, I started reading about something researchers in India had been studying. A group of adults, all of them with high blood pressure, the kind your doctor calls stage 1, the kind they tell you to watch and manage with diet before going further with medication. They gave these people 3 grams of cardamom every day for 12 weeks. That's roughly half a teaspoon. Nothing else changed. No special diet, no new exercise, no medication added. At the end of those 12 weeks, the blood pressure numbers had come down, both the top number and the bottom number. A review published in a medical journal just last year looked at 8 different clinical trials and confirmed the same thing. Cardamom reduces blood pressure. And the reason isn't complicated once you understand it. There's a compound in cardamom called 1,8-cineol. What that compound does is tell your blood vessels to relax. Your blood vessels have a kind of tension to them. When they're tight, your heart has to push harder to move blood through. When they relax, blood flows easier and the pressure comes down. It's like the difference between squeezing a garden hose in the middle versus just letting it run free. Cardamom tells the hose to let go. I started adding it to my coffee in October. By February, when I went in for my regular checkup, my doctor was looking at my chart the way I described. My blood pressure had come down enough that we had a real conversation about whether I still needed the medication at the dose I was on. That conversation had never happened before. Now the liver piece. This is the one I think most people over 60 need to hear, because we don't talk about the liver the way we should. Your liver is doing more work than almost any other organ in your body. Every single thing you eat, every medication you take, every glass of wine you've ever had, your liver processed it. And after 60 years of that, most of us have a liver that's working harder than it should be. The fat starts to build up, the inflammation starts, and the markers in your blood work start climbing slowly in the direction your doctor doesn't want to see. There was a clinical trial. Patients who had been diagnosed with what doctors call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is just a medical way of saying fat has been accumulating in the liver and causing damage. These patients took 3 grams of cardamom a day for 3 months. At the end of those 3 months, the inflammatory markers in their blood, the ones that show whether the liver is under stress, had dropped significantly. These are real measurements, the kind that show up in your blood work, the kind your doctor can see. The reason it works on the liver comes down to antioxidants. Cardamom has specific antioxidant compounds that go after the oxidative stress. Think of that as the internal rust that drives liver inflammation. When the inflammation goes down, the liver can start recovering. The liver is actually one of the most resilient organs in the body. It wants to heal. It just needs the stress load to come down enough to do it. My liver numbers, by that same February appointment, had come back into the normal range for the first time in 3 years. And then there's the hair, which I'll admit I almost didn't include because it sounds like the kind of thing you see in an ad on the back of a magazine. But it happened. And I think I understand now why it happened. So let me explain it as honestly as I can. Hair loss after 60 isn't usually just genetics. Even when genetics plays a role, it almost always involves 3 things happening together. Poor circulation in the scalp, which means the follicles aren't getting the nutrients they need to stay active. Inflammation around the follicle, which physically chokes off growth. And a hormone called DHT, which is a byproduct of testosterone, and at high levels it signals your follicles to shrink and eventually stop producing hair altogether. In 2022, researchers studying a compound found in cardamom, it's called alpinetin, discovered that it activates something in the hair follicle stem cells called Wnt signaling. Wnt signaling is essentially the biological switch that tells a sleeping follicle to wake up and start growing again. The pharmaceutical industry spends enormous amounts of money trying to trigger this pathway with synthetic compounds. Cardamom does it naturally. The same spice also improves microcirculation, the blood flow through the tiny vessels that feed your scalp, which means follicles that have been starved of oxygen and nutrients start getting fed again. I didn't grow back a full head of hair. I want to be honest about that. But the thinning stopped. And then, slowly, over about 4 or 5 months, I started seeing new growth at the crown. Fine at first, but there. My wife noticed before I did. Now here's the thing that bothered me when I put all of this together. This spice has been studied. The research exists. It's sitting in peer-reviewed medical journals that anyone can look up. And yet in 30 years of doctor's appointments, not one person ever mentioned it to me. Not once. And I don't think that's because doctors are bad people or because there's some big dark secret. I think it's simpler than that, and in some ways, sadder. Your doctor was trained to treat illness, not to study nutrition. The system he works in rewards prescriptions, not spices. A compound that you can buy for $4 and cannot be patented is never going to have a pharmaceutical company funding a study, running ads, sending representatives to doctors' offices to talk about it. The information exists, it just doesn't have anyone whose job it is to spread it. That's the only reason you and I are having this conversation instead of your doctor having it with you. So here is exactly what I do and what you can try tomorrow morning. I use half a teaspoon of ground green cardamom, not black cardamom, which is a different thing used in savory cooking. Ground green cardamom, which comes from the small light green pods. I add it directly to the coffee grounds before I brew, not after, into the grounds. The brewing process pulls out the compounds the same way it pulls out everything good from the coffee itself. The taste is warm and slightly sweet, a little floral. If you've ever had coffee at a Middle Eastern restaurant, you know exactly what this tastes like, because they've been doing it this way for 1,000 years. Bedouin traders used to pack cardamom alongside water when they crossed the desert. They didn't have clinical trials. They had 3,000 years of watching what kept people healthy. I split my dose between morning coffee and an afternoon cup. The studies use 3 grams a day, which is roughly a full teaspoon. You don't have to start there. Start with a quarter teaspoon and see how you like the flavor. Your body will tell you what it needs. Buy the pre-ground powder or buy the pods and grind them yourself. The pods stay fresh longer. Keep it in a sealed jar away from light. Any grocery store carries it. Any Indian or Middle Eastern market will have it fresher and cheaper. $4, maybe $5. That's the whole thing. My doctor told me to keep doing what I was doing. I told him what I was doing. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he'd look into it. And I thought, that's all I can ask. Just look into it. Just be willing to consider that something 3,000 years old and $4 might be doing something that a lot of expensive things haven't managed to do. I'm not telling you to stop your medication. I'm not telling you that cardamom is going to fix everything. I'm a retired engineer from Ohio, not a cardiologist. What I'm telling you is what happened to me and what the research says about why it happened, and that the cost of trying it is $4.30 every morning. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else, your kids, your grandkids, your parents before that. At some point, it has to be your turn, and sometimes taking care of yourself is the simplest thing. Something warm in the morning, something your great-grandmother would have recognized, something that doesn't require a copay or a prescription or anyone's permission. Just half a teaspoon in your morning coffee. That's where I started, and I haven't stopped since. If this was useful to you, subscribe to this channel. We talk about the research that most people never get to hear, not because it's secret, but because it's not profitable for anyone to tell you. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one, and share this with someone you care about, because the $4 isn't the point. The knowing is the point.